A viewer named Ezra dropped a comment on my last video that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. His argument was clean, it was logical, and honestly, in theory, he's not wrong. He said, in a true free market with no government intervention, no federal regulation, just courts and local judges, there's no chance of monopolization, no market manipulation, just the invisible hand doing its work. And I want to be real with you, Adam Smith would agree with him. In a perfect world. But guess what? We don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world of human behavior, of hyperbolic discounting, of information asymmetry, of game theory and power laws and the tragedy of the commons. And behavioral economics, the actual science of how people make decisions under pressure, under uncertainty, under greed, tells a completely different story about what happens when you remove the referee. So today, we're running a war game, Ezra's country. Let's call it Ezra land. His rules, no federal regulations, courts only, pure free market, and I'm going to walk you through year by year exactly what behavioral economics says happens next. Spoiler, the first 3 years are beautiful. What happens after that? That's why we're here. This is BankSmartly Media. I'm Harvey Baker Jr. Let's build. So, let me be precise about Ezra's model because I want to be fair to it. This isn't anarchism, it's closer to what political economists call anarchism. The smallest possible government footprint, and the rules are 1. No federal regulatory agencies. No FDA, no OSHA, no FTC, no SEC. 2. No state-level regulatory oversight either. 3. Courts remain, local judges remain, contracts are enforceable. 4. Private property rights are protected. 5. Voluntary exchange. Anyone can sell anything to anyone. That's Ezra land. And before I run the war game, I want to give this model its due. The case against overregulation is not a stupid case. It's not a stupid argument. Regulatory capture, where the agencies designed to control industries get controlled by those same industries, is real and well documented. Licensing requirements that exist to protect incumbents, not consumers, are real. The argument that government intervention often creates the very problems it claims to solve has real merit. I'm not here to defend the current regulatory state as perfect. I'm here to answer one specific question. What does behavioral economics predict when you remove all of it? We have 3 historical case studies that tell us the answer: Gilded Age America, post-Soviet Russia, and the developing nations I covered in the Economic Hitman video. 3 different eras, 3 different contexts, same behavioral mechanics, same outcome. Here's the timeline. In the first 3 years, Ezra is right, and I want to spend real time on this because dismissing the early benefits is intellectually dishonest. When regulations drop, something genuinely good happens for most people immediately. Competition floods in, new businesses launch, prices fall, barriers to entry collapse, entrepreneurs who couldn't navigate the compliance costs of a regulated market now can, innovation accelerates. This is documented. When the U.S. deregulated commercial airlines in 1978, average fares fell 44% in the first decade. When trucking was deregulated in 1980, freight costs dropped 25%. When telecom was deregulated in the 1990s, long-distance call prices fell by 70%. In Ezra land years 1 to 3, life is visibly better for the average consumer. More choices, lower prices, faster innovation. The invisible hand is working exactly as advertised. But here's what behavioral economics says is operating underneath that surface prosperity. The mechanism is called hyperbolic discounting, and is probably the most important concept in this entire war game. Hyperbolic discounting is the documented human tendency, replicated across hundreds of studies, to overvalue immediate rewards and dramatically undervalue future consequences. It's why people take out payday loans at 400% APR. It's why companies pursue quarterly earnings at the expense of 10-year sustainability. In Ezra Land 1, a manufacturer faces a decision: invest in safe working conditions and quality control, which costs capital, or use that capital to undercut the competition on price and grab market share right now. The math in year 1 says grab the share, deal with the consequences when they arrive. Here's the critical piece. Every competitor faces the same decision, and every one of them that chooses safety over price competition loses share to someone who didn't. This is the prisoner's dilemma at industrial scale. Individually rational decisions producing collectively catastrophic outcomes. The manufacturer who cuts safety corners first wins year 1. The one who follows wins year 2. By year 3, there's no manufacturer maintaining safety standards, not because they're evil, but because the competitive structure punishes them for it. This mechanism has a name, the race to the bottom, and it runs on hyperbolic discounting every single time. There's also something happening to market structure during these years that most people are going to miss. The businesses that survive years 1 to 3 aren't just the ones with the best products. They're the ones with the most capital, the ones who can absorb losses the longest during price wars. Small businesses can't. They get acquired or they fold. This is a documented pattern from the American Gilded Age. The first decade after the railroads were built, freight prices fell dramatically, but the railroad companies themselves were consolidating behind the scenes, using pricing power to eliminate regional competition. By year 3, the market looks freer than it ever has, but the concentration of surviving competitors is already higher than it was on day 1, and that sets up everything that happens next. That freedom rush is real, but is built on borrowed time. Borrowed from workers, from consumers, and from the competitive structure itself, and that takes us into years 3 to 10. This is where the war game gets dark, and history becomes your clearest data set. Let me introduce you to John D. Rockefeller. Because Rockefeller didn't operate in a world of heavy regulation, he operated in Ezra land. Standard Oil controls about 10% of American oil refining. Rockefeller wants more. His method is precise and documented in congressional testimony. He approaches the railroads and negotiates secret rebates, shipping discounts that his competitors can't access. Using that cost advantage, he then sells oil in competitor markets at a loss, prices below cost, sustained indefinitely until competitors go bankrupt. Then he buys their assets 4 cents on the dollar. There was no EPA, no FTC, no Sherman Antitrust Act yet. That didn't come until 1890, and only because of what Standard Oil did. Courts existed, local judges existed, exactly Ezra's model. By 1882, 10 years in, Standard Oil controlled 91% of American oil refining, not through better innovation, through a behavioral playbook called predatory pricing. Now, Ezra's response would be, that's why courts exist. Take Standard Oil to court. Here's why that doesn't work. 3 failure modes, all behavioral economics. Failure mode 1, information asymmetry. Nobel Prize winning economist George Akerlof described this with used cars, a concept called the market for lemons. When sellers know more about product quality than buyers, markets produce what he called adverse selection. Bad products drive out good ones because consumers can't distinguish them. Without mandatory disclosure requirements, corporations can sell you anything. Contaminated food, ineffective drugs, fraudulent investment products. The famous example is Upton Sinclair's 1906 investigation of the meatpacking industry. Before food safety regulations, workers' body parts literally ended up in consumer products. Yeah, let that sink in. It wasn't an accident. To go to court, you need proof, lawyers, time, and money. Standard Oil had more of all 4 than you could ever accumulate. And they fought over 2,000 simultaneous legal cases at their peak. That wasn't a defense strategy. It was an offensive weapon, using the courts Ezra relies on as a tool to exhaust smaller opponents. Failure mode 3, court capture. And this is the one most people are never going to mention. Ezra's model assumes courts remain neutral. Behavioral economics and 150 years of Gilded Age history say otherwise. Money is influence. Influence bends institutions over time. Economist George Stigler formalized this as regulatory capture theory in 1971, the documented mechanism by which regulated industries eventually dominate their own regulators. The same mechanism applies to courts. In the Gilded Age, railroad and oil interests funded the political campaigns of judges, sponsored legal education, endowed law schools with strings attached. This really sounds like an economic hit job, doesn't it? They didn't need to corrupt individual judges. They shaped the intellectual framework within which judges operated. In post-Soviet Russia, the most recent large-scale experiment in rapid deregulation, oligarchs emerged from the privatization process of the early 1990s. By 1998, those same oligarchs had effectively captured the courts system. About 7 oligarchs controlled 50% of the Russian economy within 5 years of deregulation. The courts became instruments of whichever oligarch had the most leverage that month. That's not ancient history, that's literally 30 years ago. So there's one more behavioral economics mechanism in Act 2 that deserves its own segment, the company town. In Ezra land, by year 7, the dominant employer in any given region doesn't just pay wages. They own the housing, they own the store, they own the medical facility, they own the church. This is a historical fact, not dystopian fiction. In Pullman, Illinois, in the 1880s, the Pullman Palace Car Company owned every building in town. Workers paid rent to the company, bought food at the company store at company set prices, were paid in company script that could only be spent at company establishments. When Pullman cut wages in 1893 without cutting rent, workers couldn't leave. They owed the company more than they could earn elsewhere. The Pullman strike of 1894 turned violent. Federal troops were called in. This is Ezra land year 7, not theory, is documented. By year 10, you don't have a free market. You have a captured market. The companies that survived the freedom rush used size advantages to eliminate competition through predatory pricing. They used information asymmetry to extract wealth from consumers who couldn't verify what they were buying. They used transaction cost barriers to neutralize the courts Ezra was counting on. And they used their financial dominance to gradually shape their legal and judicial frameworks that were supposed to be the last line of defense. The invisible hand is still there, it's just wearing a very expensive glove. And that brings us to the end game. Here's where the behavioral economics war game becomes uncomfortably familiar. By year 10 of Ezra land, major industries have consolidated, not to 50 competitors, not to 10, to 3, sometimes 2, in natural monopoly sectors. Utilities, rail, broadband, and here's where a mathematical concept called the Pareto distribution seals the endgame. Mathematician Vilfredo Pareto observed in 1896 that 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the population. He then found the same pattern in every country he examined. This wasn't a coincidence or a policy failure. It is a mathematical property of any system where success compounds, where winning gives you resources that help you win. Behavioral economists call this preferential attachment. The rich get richer not because of moral failure, but because of the mathematical structure of compounding advantage. In any market without redistribution mechanisms, this is the attractor state. Not equal distribution, not even healthy inequality. Extreme concentration until a small number of actors own most of the productive assets. This is why every advanced civilization that survived long-term eventually developed tax systems, antitrust mechanisms, or wealth redistribution structures, not out of ideology, out of survival mathematics. Now, here's the behavioral mechanism that triggers the collapse phase. The tragedy of the commons described by ecologist Garrett Hardin in 1968. When a shared resource has no management system, individuals acting in rational self-interest deplete until collapse. In Ezra land years 20 to 30, the shared resources being depleted are the labor pool. Wages spiral towards subsistence because there's no floor. Workers have no leverage. The only constraint on wages is the minimum a worker will accept to survive. Companies will find that minimum and pay it. This isn't speculation. This is documented history of every pre-labor law economy. The physical environment. No EPA means industrial waste goes wherever it's cheapest to dump. Rivers, groundwater, air. The costs are externalized to communities. Real economic costs, not abstract ones. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio literally caught fire 13 times between 1868 and 1969. That wasn't a natural disaster. It's kind of crazy to think about a waterway lighting on fire. This was rational corporate behavior under no regulatory constraint. And most critically, social trust itself. Markets run on trust that the food label is accurate. Trust that the contract will be honored. Trust that the measurement is honest. When information asymmetry becomes extreme enough, when you can't trust what you're buying, who you're buying it from, or whether the court will protect you if you're defrauded, the friction cost of every transaction explodes. High friction economies don't grow, they stagnate. And economies that stagnate under extreme wealth concentration produce only one outcome with historical reliability: political instability and demand for a strong man to restore order. By year 30, Ezra land doesn't look like libertarian paradise. It looks like Gilded Age America in 1890, which is why the Sherman Antitrust Act passed. It looks like Russia in 1998, which is why Putin's centralization was initially welcomed. It looks like every nation on the World Bank structural adjustment list that I covered in the last video. The population doesn't sit with extreme inequality quietly. They demand the referee back, and history shows that whoever provides the referee tends to accumulate significant power in the process. The road from Ezra land to authoritarianism is not a straight line, but it is a well-traveled one. So, what actually went wrong with Ezra's model? Because it's not that the invisible hand theory is false, it's that the conditions required for it to function are not self-sustaining. Adam Smith described markets as information processing systems. Prices signal value. Competition drives efficiency. Voluntary exchange creates mutual benefit. That framework is correct under specific conditions. But here's what most people who cite Adam Smith don't know. In the same book where he described the invisible hand, Smith wrote this, and I'm quoting directly from Wealth of Nations. People of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. Smith knew. He knew the invisible hand requires roughly equal hands. He knew that businesses left entirely to their own devices will coordinate to eliminate competition. He wasn't describing a self-correcting utopia. He was describing a mechanism that produces good outcomes when competitive conditions are maintained and very, very bad outcomes when they're not. The question behavioral economics asks is simple. Do competitive conditions maintain themselves without external enforcement? The answer from 150 years of industrial capitalism, post-Soviet deregulation, and developing world structural adjustment is a consistent and hard no. Capital concentrates, markets consolidate, information asymmetry grows. The institutions designed to provide neutral dispute resolution get shaped by the interests with the most capital to shape them. The regulation debate is not markets versus government. The real question, the one worth having, is what is the minimum viable rule set to keep competitive conditions from collapsing under their own mathematical weight? That's a legitimate, important debate, and it's the one Ezra's framing doesn't address. Here's why this matters beyond theory and why I connected it to the economic hitman video. Economic hitmen operated in countries that looked like Ezra land. Weak regulatory frameworks, courts captured by wealth or foreign interests, markets liberalized, which is the policy word for deregulated and privatized simultaneously. The playbook was extremely precise, remove regulatory barriers under the label of structural adjustment, open markets to foreign capital, let natural consolidation run its course under the guise of efficiency. By the time the dust settles, foreign corporations own the infrastructure, the natural resources, and the debt. The local population holds the bill. Ecuador did it, Indonesia did it, Argentina did it, Greece did it under the name austerity. And as I argued in the last video, the structural logic is now being applied domestically in America, not through IMF conditionalities, through deregulation debates, agency dismantlement, and a cultural pressure to frame any government market intervention as tyranny. Ezra's invisible hand argument isn't naive. It's the intellectual foundation for a policy direction with very specific beneficiaries. The people it benefits most are the people who already have enough capital to survive and profit from in the consolidation phase. If you're watching this channel, you're almost certainly not one of those people. You're building, you're accumulating, you're trying to create systems that earn while you sleep so you don't have to be dependent on a wage and a single employer in a market structure that doesn't have your best interests at heart. That's the mission here. Understanding how these systems actually work, not how we're told they work, is the edge that lets you build before the war game makes more sense after you see the playbook. I'm Harvey Baker Jr. This is BankSmartly Media. Let's build.